Hi everybody, welcome to Sunya IAS. Welcome to the mains article discussion. Today we are going to discuss about the Global Biofuel Alliance. Now this was one of the major outcomes of the recent G20 Summit which was held in India's presidency, right? So first of all, we'll look at the data related to biofuels. We define what a biofuel is, very simple terms, and then we will understand all the possible advantages, challenges related to this particular alliance, like why was there a need for it, what do we get from that, right? We'll see this in this particular lecture. Now when I'm talking of data, let us firstly understand what is the size of the ethanol market. Okay, now as per 2022, this market is valued at $100 billion. Okay, as per 2022, and in the next 10 years, that is by 2032, this is expected to grow to $162 billion. So number one, ethanol as a market is booming. Okay, second thing is that as per International Energy Agency IEA, now this basically tells us that if we want to achieve the ambitious target of net zero, okay, by 2050, we would want to triple down on using ethanol and let's say blending it, right? So there is a need to increase the production, and that to have it 3 times the value. So there is a considerable need for growth in this sector. Okay, so two things we've seen. One, the market for ethanol is booming, and just after I'm done with data, I'll tell you the case studies of, for example, Brazil, US, who have done fairly well because of integration of ethanol, okay, and as a biofuel. Then the ethanol production. So currently in India, okay, we have seen that we are able to meet around 10%. There are blending targets in India. So right now we've been able to meet 10% of this, and we produced almost 4 billion, okay, 4 billion liters of ethanol. Now you may wonder what was that big need here. Now while producing these 4 billion liters of ethanol, we were able to reduce the carbon dioxide consumption or emissions, okay, by 2.7 million tons, or roughly you can say 3 million tons. Okay, so while blending ethanol, so number one, see, if you're blending ethanol into the conventional, let's say petrol, number one, your consumption of petrol will reduce. Emissions from petrol would also reduce because these are cleaner fuels. Okay, so we produced around 4.8 or 4.08 billion liters of ethanol, and we were able to have a reduction in the carbon dioxide by 2.7 million tons. Okay, so you can again write down 4 billion liters of ethanol was produced. Okay, and the production of 4.8 roughly billion liters helped us in achieving the target of 10% blending, which again I have to remind you that our current blending target for ethanol for the year 2025 is 20%. Okay, so you should also know the current facts that right now we are at 10%, and by the year 2025 we want to achieve the blending target for ethanol by 20%, right? So this is the data. Generally when we write our answers, it is always good to introduce the data. Okay, now again, before I tell you what are the different generations, a one-line definition I'll give you about what is a biofuel. Okay, so again, a biofuel is a fuel that can be produced from plants or the natural sources like plants or animal waste. So conventionally you have the coal or the fossil based fuel products, which number one takes a lot of time to produce. Okay, and again it is a non-renewable source of energy. It is far polluting. So in that sense, biofuels can be produced from sources like plant and animal waste, and because of that, these are renewable in nature and they are less polluting and we will see the various applications. But let me firstly tell you the different generations of biofuels, because after this you will then understand the Global Biofuel Alliance in more detail. Okay, of course we have the first generation biofuels. All you need to remember here is these are made from, these are derived from the food crops. You can have starch, you can have cellulose. Okay, so this is basically forming the first generation biofuels, and these are the most common ones. Okay, so use of starch, corn, cellulose, etc. is giving you first generation biofuels. Then you have second generation biofuels, in the sense you are generating biofuels from non-food sources. This can include examples like jatropha. Okay, so remember, first generation is food sources, second generation is non-food sources. Then you have third generation of biofuels. All you have to remember is that they are utilizing algae. Okay, so the production of biofuels wherein you use algae gives us the third generation of biofuels. Okay, and then you have the fourth generation. In fact, in the fourth generation, a lot of research work is being carried out. These ones can be carbon neutral and they can also be carbon negative. It means during their process of, let's say, making, they take up a lot of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So in that sense, they can be carbon neutral, or even in some cases, they can be carbon negative, which means they absorb more and emit less. First of all, we should be very aware that what is a biofuel, okay, and then what are the different types of biofuel, and in that sense, you need to know about the generations. Of course, when we move through better technology, better research and development, then we progress through different generations, as we have seen in mobile and different, let's say, cellular technologies, 4G, 5G. In the similar manner, you have first generation, second, third, and fourth. Okay. Now, again, let us see what are the advantages of biofuels. And again, through the various mains related discussions, you would have seen that we do not just simply tell you 5-10 points. We give you dimensions and we help you segregate the points. And it is always better when you listen to these discussions, you also in your head maybe try to pause the lecture here and try to brainstorm what are the advantages of biofuel, why do we use it. Okay, so there will be some very obvious advantages. Okay, so one by one I'll tell you. So of course, number one is environmental. Of course, how I defined it, we understood that these are renewable sources of energy, can be made from plant and animal waste, takes lesser time. Okay, so in that sense, these are renewable. Second, these are cleaner sources of energy. Now notice, I am not saying that these are absolutely zero pollution free, there is no emissions. No. Yes, these are cleaner, which means yes, they are polluting to some extent, but very less as compared to the conventional fuel sources. So in that sense, these are cleaner sources of energy, right? Which is why there is a lot of demand now for the biofuels. Okay. Of course, they reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. In the conventional fuels, when you burn it, you have, let's say, the oxides of carbon, oxides of nitrogen released in larger amounts. In this case, it is less, which again makes it a good choice. Then we can convert waste to energy. Again, in both economics and environment, you read about waste to energy, which means again, if you have animal waste, plant waste, or let's say there is damaged crop, etc., you can convert it through existing, there are different techniques. Okay, so there are different waste to energy techniques. You can talk about pyrolysis, incineration, okay, plasma gasification, so on and so forth, right, in which the waste can be converted into energy. Again, you can, if you think about biogas, okay, or different plants, in that what you do, you convert the waste into energy. And again, this is a very important aspect here. In fact, when I was telling to you about algae, third generation and fourth generation biofuel, and when you combine that with waste to energy, right now a lot of emphasis and research is on this particular topic. So this can give you even newer updates on clean energy. Okay, so both clean energy and this part of converting waste to energy would go in tandem. And yes, the fourth generation biofuels have carbon neutrality potential. Okay, so they can be carbon neutral. So that is also very important for us to understand, right? So at the environmental level, the renewable clean energy reduce the greenhouse gases. converting the waste to energy, and these are some of the things that you should be aware about, right? So you can write it here. In fact, I can even tell you, when I'm talking of converting waste to energy, you can also write about biomethanation. Okay, use of, let's say, biodigesters for making biogas, etc. So these can also be some important components of environmental case. Then strategic, again very important. Energy security. Now imagine that if a country is totally dependent on the incoming or imported fuels, right? And as we have seen, Russia-Ukraine conflict happening. So if there is any outside challenge, what can happen? That your energy security might get hampered because of a geopolitical conflict or a tension, right? So it is always better to have diversified portfolio. So if you have availability of biofuels with you, you would not only just be dependent on one set of fuels, right? So, and from the energy security, yes, strategic means long term. So this is going to help in energy security, and yes, this is going to help in diversification of energy sources, right? Now again, energy security is very important, okay? Because fuel is not just for transport. Fuel would also be used as a source of energy. It would also be ultimately linked to food security, right? So if there is a shortage of a fuel, and again think of nations like India, which are very much import dependent on, let's say, the incoming crude oil, etc. So there can be a shortage, and this can lead to potentially, let's say, devastating outcomes. This is why the strategic point here is very important for biofuels, that if we have more of biofuels, okay, so we would be able to use it better. And yes, economic potential is also very important. Even if I do not tell you the points, we can imagine, number one, if I was totally dependent on incoming, let's say, import of the fossil fuels, if now we are able to get biofuels, so number one, let's say if I used to import 100 gallons of petrol per day, for example, now I need only 80 gallons. Number one, my import dependence cost has reduced. I will save the forex, okay? So economic savings are there very much. Of course, environmental savings will be there, lesser carbon dioxide emissions, okay? Now, the waste products, the animal waste or different other products can be utilized by farmers. The farmers can get more revenue out of it. So this is in line with doubling the farmer's income. So yes, now the farmer's income can get increased, right? Now, this can be an efficient fuel. Later on in this discussion, I'll talk about flex fuel vehicles, okay, wherein you are combining biofuels with the conventional fuels in some hybrid models, and you are using them, and these are also more efficient in nature. Again, more savings, okay. And then a very important point is abundant availability. If these are very much abundant, plants and these animal waste can be utilized. So this is more renewable in nature, more efficient, abundantly available. So again, not a lot of stress both on the farmers or also not on the government, right? And again, if there is more income, etc., which is going to be here, this can also be used for development of rural areas, which we have also seen schemes like PM Gobardhan scheme, okay, or the PM Jeevan Yojana. I will talk about it very shortly. But then this is also linked with rural development, right? Compatibility with existing infrastructure. Okay, so again, you don't have to create a very, let's say, different set of refineries, while you do need a basic set of infrastructure, but again, it is going to be compatible with the existing, because again, a lot of cheap biodigesters or biogas plants are also available. So we will be able to create these biofuels, right? So these are a lot of advantages which we get, okay? Now, in the advantages, I can again tell you examples of countries like Brazil, countries, of course, like India. Okay, so what happened again in the case of Brazil? Because Brazil was able to produce a lot of ethanol, okay, from again its big sugar, let's say, industries. So because of that, it was able to create a diversified set of energy produced in that regard. So this was also something which was important here, okay. So Brazil, you can of course mention that it was able to, number one, reduce the carbon emissions, and second, again, was able to feed for itself. Then there can be more advances. For example, in India and in other developing economies, a lot of research is being done on the fuels, these fuels specifically. One for environmental aspect, but more importantly, for venturing into the clean energy, which you can again link it to, again in the previous lecture we had seen about mission life. You can talk about net zero. So these things are integrated, right? So we can again use the examples of Brazil. You can talk about India. Okay. So this creates jobs. For example, when I talk about United States, a lot of new jobs are being created because of biofuel production. So again, these are some of the country example. And again, we have seen multiple advantages of biofuels. But of course, there are some challenges here as well. Okay. One of the biggest challenges is the food versus fuel debate. Okay. And I will give you an example of a country here as well, which basically means, let's say, if you have, first of all, the basic objective of any government is to feed the hungry, to ensure food security. But sometimes we have seen that the food production or these food products are, let's say, being diverted. Okay. There is a diversion of the food products to meet the needs of biofuels. And this causes market distortions. This has been seen in Mexico, wherein a lot of food products were being diverted to meet the demands of increasing biofuel. Now, biofuel can be used both domestically as well as exported. Now, when this was being done, this created the different dynamics in the market. Okay, it caused, of course, the food prices also became very volatile. It increased. Again, the simple demand and supply. So yes, this can cause, this is one of the core debates here, the food versus fuel debate. Okay, this is one of the challenges. Again, one by one, we'll go through some of the challenges here. In the environmental challenges, that one of the issue is the resource intensity, right? Again, for example, when you cultivate a lot of these, let's say, biofuels, the available resources, so there is a stress because of the food production, but again, you have to use some of them surplus products. Okay, so this can cause issues of resource intensity. Then adverse impact on the land. Now again, here I'll tell you, especially in the case of countries where water availability is a problem. Okay, so here both the land and these ecosystems are put under a lot of stress, right? Because to cultivate these biofuels, you require both water. Imagine the case of sub-Saharan countries where water already is a scarce resource, and on top of that, you have to meet the needs. Then it can become a problem. Think about countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. Okay, there also excess palm oil cultivation just to meet the needs of biofuels also led to water shortages. Okay, so there is an adverse impact on the land. It can alter the overall, let's say, agroclimatic zones. Okay, it can even alter the microclimate, right? These are few of the issues. And also, it does have emissions. I'm not saying that it would not have emissions. So yes, the emissions can also be there. Let's say you use a lot of feedstock for making biofuels. So yes, there will be some emissions in that regard, right? So emissions can also be there, right? And yes, this can be a threat to the delicate ecosystems. The ecosystems which are fragile would also be put into a lot of threat because of this whole problem, right? And also there are issues with respect to, let's say, availability of feedstock. It would not be, let's say, happening every time that you get a lot of diversified feedstock. Sometimes there can be vagaries of monsoon. You have a less standard food production. Then how would you meet the demands for biofuels, right? And the countries have ambitious, let's say, blending targets, again, to be used in transport, etc. So that will be a problem. Rising food prices, we have seen the cases of Mexico. We have seen the issues in Indonesia and Malaysia. Okay, and the energy efficiency concerns, this is also there. Again, if you see, for example, the Deen Bandhu biogas plant or the different biogas plants, in many cases, they are not very energy efficient. They are sometimes even not modernized. They consume a lot of feedstock, and then the overall output, if you think it from input versus output perspective, sometimes is not that great. So that is also a problem. Then the biofuel versus the food production debate. Again, I told you that first, whether you want to meet the needs of the people, and when you meet the needs of the people, how much should be the target? Is it causing an adverse or excess stress on the ecosystem and the resources? This will always be a battle, because again, remember, in modern Indian history, in history in general, we have seen that sometimes plantations, because this is more remunerative, you do it a lot, but sometimes you do it on places where it does not support the agroclimatic zones. So this can lead to the, let's say, reduction in the fertility, so on and so forth, that there can be other issues here as well, right? Now, issues are also related to technological advancements. Now, I was telling you about second generation, third and fourth generation. Now, these advanced generations are, let's say, carried out with more propensity in the developed countries, because again, these require a lot of technology, a lot of money, a lot of research. The average farmer does not even have the access to these technologies. They have to be made aware. Okay, this is there. And of course, issue of infrastructure and distribution. Again, for example, I'll tell you, if you want to use the second generation biofuels, you have to have proper biorefineries. The refineries should have capacity. Do you have that? Otherwise, what would happen? The excess feedstock which is available with you is going to get rotten. So if you want it to be used, you should have a decent infrastructure. If the infrastructure is present, you should be able to distribute it. Because if the blending has to happen, first of all, the biofuel has to be made, then finally it has to be transported, then mixed, blended, then again it has to be used, right? So it has to be distributed again in a proper manner. This also requires money. So you can understand there are certain challenges. However, we know that yes, there is a certain need. That is why there is this Global Biofuel Alliance, which came up in the recent G20 Summit, of course, which was presided by India. In India's presidency and many countries here, around 19 partner countries actually supported this Global Biofuel Alliance with the whole objective, okay, of increasing the production of biofuels. Now again, now these things will make a lot of sense to you. Why? Because in the initial slide of data, I told you 4 facts. 1, it is a booming market. Second, as per International Energy Agency, tripling the production of biofuels would help us achieve the net zero targets. Then with respect to India, I told you that the production of, let's say, 4 odd billion liters of the ethanol helped in reduction of carbon dioxide by almost 2.7 million tons. Okay. And again, we have very ambitious blending targets. So this is only about India. Think about the global level. Okay. So that is why we need an alliance, a global biofuel alliance, so that we are able to carry this out as a global movement, because we understand the big advantage and the utility which the global the biofuels serve us, and that is why there is a need to harness it. Okay, now let us see what are the objectives of this Global Biofuel Alliance. Okay, so this is more or less, you will understand when I explain it to you. Okay, so for example, we will start here with promoting international collaboration. Okay, so number 1, at the international level, of course, when you have an alliance, so you have different countries who will come up together. They will share their technologies, they will share the resources, the technical know-hows on how to achieve this. So this is number 1, going to promote international collaboration. And you would want to have robust supply chains, that even if for some reason one is not able to get the biofuels from a certain country, the international collaboration will help us achieve our targets, number 1. Then developing robust markets, again here, why robust? So that any disruption in the supply chain does not affect the supply or the demand as much as possible, which also includes, let's say, if there is a global geopolitical conflict, which we have seen, and you would also see both in the cases of COVID or because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the, let's say, the petroleum or the, let's say, Russian oil, the availability of it, and not just that, the availability of critical materials, okay, the availability of, let's say, basic, let's say, food resources, all of that was disrupted. We don't want that to happen. That is why we want to have international collaboration, and we want to develop robust markets which can be resilient to the shocks posed by the international system. Okay, then enhancing sustainable biofuel use. Again, you would notice the word sustainable in almost all these lectures on environment, right? Be it COP28 recently concluded, be it Mission Life, everything at every way we want it to be sustainable, which meets the need of the present generation as well as the future generations. So yes, it talks about sustainable biofuel usage. Now this is also a very important point: policy development and support. You people will be the future bureaucrats. Okay, you have to think in long term policy manner, India's energy security in a long term manner. We want proper policies for that, so that things should not be ad hoc, temporary. We want things to be long term in a proper institutionalized format, right? For that, we need proper policy development and support, right? And this is also what the alliance aims to achieve. Then, highlighting the best practices. For example, I gave you the examples of Brazil, examples also in India of good, let's say, agricultural practices using the waste to make biofuels. Then let's say the cases of different countries like the United States, where more jobs are being created as a result of this industry. So if through an alliance we are able to understand the best practices, it can be deployed both horizontally and vertically. This would also help, right? So highlighting the best practices will also help, and complementing the existing initiatives. Okay, so when I'm talking about the existing initiatives, right? So here the whole idea, okay, so that for example you have a clean energy ministerial, you have a global biofutures platform, there are initiatives to support bioenergy and bioeconomy. Okay, so right from the clean energy ministerials forum, okay, the global, let's say, initiatives on biofuel, ultimately it will support these existing initiatives. Okay, so these are the objectives of a global biofuel alliance. Because generally if you get a question, and again when you have to analyze this topic from the mains perspective, you should know, number one, again, what are biofuels, advantages and challenges of biofuels, generations of biofuels, the data related to biofuels, objectives of this particular alliance, right? So these are some of the things you are expected to know. And again, extending on what we had learned so far, we had seen what are the benefits of biofuels generally. But again, a more specific question can be, what is the significance of Global Biofuel Alliance for India? What is the significance of this for India? Again, we can bifurcate it. Environmental, we can again look at it from a strategic lens, from the economic lens, right? So here also, if you see at the environmental level, right? So number one, again, we have seen an emerging flex fuel vehicles. Okay, these vehicles can have a mix of biofuels and the traditional fuels in different varying varieties, and this would be, let's say, the vehicles of the future in times to come. So yes, this can be used, number one. Second, it helps when you have a biofuel alliance, you would be using more of biofuels, and these are relatively more cleaner, so you will reduce the environment pollution, and also it will help you in climate action. Again, link this with the recently concluded COP, Conference of Parties 28, link this with India's Panchamrit or the net zero targets. And not just this, just think of overall climate change. So transitioning to a renewable and a cleaner source will always be helpful for India also and for the world also, right? So these are the obvious environmental objectives, and you can even borrow from the objectives environmental which we have already seen, right? Then strategic also, these things now again will make more sense to you. For example, think of security, okay, and think of both energy independence, right? In both the things, so both from India's energy security perspective and also India's energy independence, this is going to help you when you have a proper, let's say, policy outline for the biofuels, if you're collaborating with international partners, like-minded countries, right? So a robust supply of energy would be there, right? And there will be an energy independence. You would not solely be dependent on, let's say, one or two countries. And because of that, you will also be, so if there is any disruption which is happening because of any war or a geopolitical conflict, you should see this point as a ongoing or perhaps a new geopolitical conflict. An alliance like this will help you be insulated. It will help you being insulated from all these things, right? Again, that is something which is important to us. And a very important point is global climate action leadership. Now again here, both, because this was launched at India's presidency, India was at the forefront. And also India, you can link with mission lifestyle for environment. So here also India is setting a good example. So we are working towards climate action leadership. So this also gives us a good space to maneuver, right? So strategically, so both in long term, we are having good aspirations here. So this again is a good important significance of the particular alliance, right? So this is also one. And at the economic level, okay, so there are certain things that I would want to at least highlight for you. At the economic level, okay, the economy would be stimulated. Again, there will be more jobs created, right? There is a transition from a fossil based to a more cleaner source of energy, right? A technological boost, again think of second generation, third generation, fourth generation, so there will be a boost of technology here, right? Fuel blending, link this with flex fuel vehicles. We're talking of fuel blending. Again, India's ethanol blending target for 2025 is 20%, right? Then if suppose you are meeting the demands of the biofuel internally, India can even export it. Let's say if in certain states there is a bumper fuel production, you are able to feed your population, and on top of that, you're able to meet the blending targets. So whatever pending can be exported. There are obvious financial benefits. You are, let's say, reducing the import cost, right? So again, you are saving, right? Employment can be more generated. So this can also help, right? Farmers aid, and you can directly think of doubling the farmers income. We've already discussed these points. So this will help you more reinforce these points. And ultimately, the biofuel production, we have seen both in terms of figures, 4.8 billion liters, okay, was produced. And with that, we were able to save or reduce the emissions of carbon dioxide by 2.7 billion tons, right? And the increasing production, why? Because we have to meet our blending targets. So this is that would be a win-win, provided we are able to take care of the challenges. So first of all, I hope the significance of this particular alliance for India is actually very clear to you. Okay. Now, of course, if there's a significance, there would always be some obvious challenges. Let us go through that. Okay. So again, there will be some geopolitical contestations and secrecy concerns. I'll explain both of them. So for example, an alliance, in an alliance, you're supposed to work or collaborate with countries. Okay. Now, US, usually we have seen in the past, United States, because it has a lot of access to proprietary technology, it is not willing to share a lot of these technological developments because of patents, or let's say the sharing of this technology. Second, what about countries like, let's say, China, Russia, or other countries which might not be aligning with the views of other Western countries? So there can be some geopolitical contestation. They might think that this particular alliance, while it is said for a particular objective, it might be using some ulterior motives, right? So both contestation can happen, and also secrecy concerns between the countries. Okay, that even if you have the best of alliance, but when it comes to sharing data, and that to proprietary technology data, not many countries would be willing. And in fact, I'm giving you the example of United States. That is certainly a challenge, strategic, right? If the countries do not share information and technology, then ultimately this alliance would only be a collection of some members who meet and discuss but do not act, right? Second, again, there are issues, institutional issues. One, technology transfer. Okay, here also again the issues of money, IPR, etc. will be there. And secondly, there will be funding constraints also. Most of these alliances, when they are released, everything is good, but actually when it comes to putting money, operationalization of finance is such a big problem. Okay, so again, both funding constraints and ultimately technology transfer. Now again, for example, we have seen that India and US have had very good strategic engagement. Okay, we have the foundational defense agreement we have signed with the United States. But there is still a problem in the sense that maybe US would not have that level of comfort with all the member countries. Okay, and again, I'm here giving you only two examples of countries. There can be even more, and they can be different blocks which are divided. So ultimately, there will be a challenge here, right? Then, in terms of economic and policy challenges. So one, crop yield. Now we will make projections, maybe based on a good year. What if that year you have El Nino? Okay, what if you have lesser monsoon? So crop yield, if that is fluctuating, you might not be able to meet your targets. And again, all these calculations will go for a toss. Maybe import, export, all of this is not getting properly done, right? And issues of global warming, and on top of the declining of fluctuating crop yield, you have a problem of global warming as well, right? Then there are some trade barriers between the countries. Now, if you create an alliance, fine. But what about the existing trade, tariff or non-tariff barriers? So this is also going to be a problem. Then the issue of resource depletion. Now here again, the fertility of land and the availability of these plant and animal waste resources is going to be very different in different parts of both India and the world. So the resource depletion would also mean that you cannot continuously have the production of biofuels. So again, that would require some calibration and changes. Again, that's the challenge, right? And then there will be some environmental concerns for sure. Again, I gave you the example of, for example, Maldives, or let's say Indonesia, wherein you had a lot of oil palm, let's say cultivation. You wanted to produce more biofuels, but then there were some environmental concerns here as well. The disruption of microclimate, the changes, okay? So that is a concern for sure in this particular case. So yes, environmental concerns will be there. Okay, the use of it, maybe the excessive use of biofuels or the cultivation of these feed waste alters the basic chemistry or the foods, the soil here. Maybe we are not able to get the maximum produce here as well. Okay, so again, that will be a problem in this case, right? So these are the challenges for your Global Biofuel Alliance, right? Now, again, because we are talking about the India's context, you should also know that India has taken some major steps in this regard. And out of these, two steps I'll tell you are very important. One is the PM G1 Yojana, and one is the Govardhan Yojana, okay, the PM Govardhan scheme. So, of course, the first thing in the G20 Summit, we had this particular Global Biofuel Alliance, which again is a very important step taken in India's presidency, right? To promote biofuels, that is number one. India, okay, along with Brazil and US, account for almost 85% production of the biofuels. So again, in this regard, India is a major player, right? And again, you can also see, because see, both Brazil and India have big sugar production. And again, in sugar, you have a lot of waste. From that waste also, you can generate biofuels. So one, we are a major global player as well, okay? We also have a robust ethanol blending program. For now, the target for 2025 is 20% blending. So again, to meet these targets, we have to ramp up our biofuel production, okay? Then infrastructure development is being done through schemes like PM G1 Yojana. Now, PM G1 Yojana specifically talks about 2G. 2G means second generation of biofuels. So it talks about the viability gap funding. Around 500 crore rupees have been allocated here. And there is the PM G1 Yojana in which 2G refineries are to be set up. Again, see, if you have to, let's say, blend or ultimately create a biofuel, you should have the refineries. Now, when you have the refineries, then only you will be able to now properly execute this, right? So yes, infrastructure development is there, right? So in terms of government support, you have the Pradhan Mantri G1 Yojana. Now, G1 Yojana, only thing you have to remember here, at least here, 500 crores viability gap funding is there. Okay, so ultimately to augment our 2G refineries, you have the Pradhan Mantri G1 Yojana. Fine. Then you have the GOBAR, which is the galvanizing organic bio agro resources Govardhan scheme. Okay, this also is complementing and ultimately promoting the use of biofuels. There is the repurpose RUCO, repurpose used cooking oil, again by FSSAI, again in which there are certain let's say targets which are mentioned. Okay, in that sense also, if this also promotes that whatever is the waste product, from that also you can create your biofuels, right? And there is also very important the national biofuel policy, which ultimately tells you the different generation of biofuels. Okay, how can it help in, let's say, doubling the farmer's income? So this policy is actually a very important document. Both in prelims and mains, we have seen questions coming from this particular segment, definitely, right? So these are some things that we should know, that what steps has India taken to promote biofuels, right? And then yes, we also talk about flex fuel vehicles. We have seen this point now second time, okay? Because again, as and when we modernize, we look for alternate sources of transport, movement, etc. We would also look into the possibility of flex fuel vehicles, and this also ties with our idea of ethanol blending program. There are various 10%, 15%, 20% different blending of fuel. So you can have flex fuels, means flexible, right? It can be different based on the different refining and the different targets, right? So there also we have, and this also promotes the use of biofuels. Okay, again, what should be the way forward for India's biofuel initiative? Okay, what should be the way forward? Let us see that. So number one is standardization. Now, if you're producing biofuels at such a big level, we can think about BIS, Bureau of Indian Standards, to give us some standards, so that both internally, which means domestically, as well as for export, we are able to have proper quality biofuels which are created, right? Then of course we have to have infrastructure investment. Already there is a PM G1 scheme, okay, which again is related to the 2G, let's say, refineries to be set up. Okay, again you need more investment, both in terms of distribution, infrastructure, handling, right, to make this particular initiative a big success. And now we even have to collaborate with international partners. So we need to have a very robust, sound infrastructure, so that we are able to meet the ethanol blending targets, right? Again, you need to have awareness campaign. Now, RUCO initiative was one such awareness campaign. We need more campaigns so that both the farmers and the people are also aware about the possible uses of these, let's say, plant and animal waste, which can be converted into biofuels. And now you can imagine the kind of advantages which we can have by utilizing the biofuels, both at a strategic level, environmental level, and at an economic level, right? Then diversification of feedstock is very important. That is why I told you the different generations of biofuels, so that you are not just limited to the first generation in which you only talk about the food crops, but again you can think about non-food crops, algae, and then the fourth generation. So if we are able to diversify the feedstock, it is even important for our energy security, because then we will not be just dependent on one particular source, right? Then international collaboration has to be there. Now international collaborations gives you the advantage of, again, technology transfer, resource management, right, sharing of the best in the international practices, etc. So this international collaboration will help us go a long way. This is also very important to augment our biofuel related initiatives further, right? So with this, we come to the end of this lecture on the Global Biofuel Alliance. We have covered this very extensively, so that any question which you get from the mains perspective, be it advantages, challenges with respect to India or the globe, or for the Global Biofuel Alliance, you will be 100% able to write it. Okay, and this is the objective with these mains article discussion. Again, if you want the notes, you can go to our Telegram channel, Sunya Notes 50. You can get it from there. And again, you can keep following us for other mains article discussions. I'll be meeting you shortly. Thank you.